we're absolutely fortunate to have this particular individual who works for, who's co-founder actually, and a director of Ampere analysis. I personally believe they're one of the best analyst firms in the world to understand what is going on within the TV, the video, and the media market and the advertising industry. He's come all the way over from LA, where he lives now. Ladies and gentlemen, give a massive hand to Guy Bisson, who's going to kick off the event.
Cheers. Thank you, Justin. I'm not blushing, honestly. But yes, we are the best analyst firm in the world. There you go. So my job is to set the scene, and that's what I'm going to try to do. We're going to be talking about advertising on streaming and what the entrance of platforms like Netflix and Disney Plus into this market mean. If you were at the breakfast event, and I know many of you weren't, you'll have heard discussion about how the audience of Netflix is not necessarily the advertising audience of Netflix, but I'm going to tell you exactly what that audience is like and how big it is going to be. So let's start with a bit of scene setting. Well, firstly, Australia as a market remains stubbornly resistant to online video advertising transition. Now you can see the blue line there, television advertising, flat, slightly in decline, but not anything like we're seeing in other markets. This is ad dollars, by the way. The pink line, online video advertising, growing very strongly, but in pretty much every other market, those lines crossed last year or the year before. And that is even though Australia is one of the top 10 most highly penetrated streaming markets in the world. Just a few years ago, it was at number 1. It actually had higher Netflix penetration than the USA, but it has slipped down the scale a little bit. Nonetheless, one of the top 10 streaming markets, and the advertising transition has not occurred. But something changed this year, just a small thing, and that small thing is illustrated in the next couple of slides. 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago even, we had a mix of business models. The studios, Netflix, Amazon were effectively pay television services, subscription businesses. We had a few free streaming specialists like Tubi and a couple of studios that were embracing so-called hybrid models, mixing advertising and streaming. Look at the picture today, and there's been a huge convergence on that middle ground of hybrid. Apple is the only standout now in the entire market, at least on a global basis, who is pure play, pay television effectively, subscription business models. But there are many, many implications of that shift. So Netflix moving into advertising. They are the poster child for everything that happens in global streaming. So we refer to Netflix, but when we talk about that, we're also thinking about Disney and HBO and Paramount Plus and all of the direct-to-consumer major global streamers who have also now embraced advertising. Particularly in this market, because Netflix is the second most viewed streaming platform in the country, and that's even including all of the social video platforms. So even talking about TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, Netflix is actually second to YouTube, and this again is actually quite unusual for the two to be that close. YouTube is usually streets ahead of everybody else, and then we go down from there. But very, very high uptake of Netflix within the Australian market. And certainly, of course, higher usage and viewing on a monthly basis than the broadcaster streaming services that are present in this market. Now, we all know that there is a demographic difference between Snapchat and TikTok at one end of the scale, and then the broadcaster streaming services at the other. So this is a beautifully symmetrical chart of the age difference between the various platforms through social media up to the broadcaster services. But the key thing to take away from this, and the reason it's really important, is where Netflix is sitting within this chart. Smack bang in the middle with a relatively balanced demographic. Now that, of course, is a reflection of its very high penetration. It's obviously going to trend to average. But the point is that it's playing in the same demographic field as the broadcast streaming platforms that are currently controlling streaming advertising in this market. Here's another way to think about that, and this is a question that we field a couple of times a year, where we ask people if they would be happy to see advertising if it saved them a bit of money on their streaming bill each month. And the people most likely to say that fall into a particular demographic. So the mid-20s to the mid-30s, up to sort of early 40s, is the key demographic that is likely to adopt advertising on Netflix and other streaming platforms. And that, of course, is also the core of the Netflix audience. So what does that person look like? This is the demographic skews of people who answered yes to that question. Yes, I would like to save a bit of money, and I'm willing to see adverts in order to do so. Firstly, they're much more likely to be male. They are 40% more likely to be in their 30s or 40s. They probably have young children at home, and their daily viewing is quite considerably higher than the average Australian household. So the average household, by our data, reports 4 hours, 46 minutes of TV viewing a day. These people, 5 hours at 11. They already have 3.5 streaming services, and they really like crime and action and sport content, and then to a lesser degree, music and romance. And then just obscure statistic of the day, and maybe, Justin, that will win me one of your doggy bags, but for some reason, they really love 10-play. They are 63% more likely to watch 10-play than average, and I have no idea why. Perhaps because of that crime, action, genre skew, maybe, but maybe someone in the room can work that one out. Very, very obscure. So what about if we then drill down into that audience by platform? So of people who watch each of the platforms you see along the axis on that graph, how many of them are likely to want to see advertising or willing to see advertising? Interestingly, some of those sports streamers, they're very keen to save a bit of money, maybe because they're spending an awful lot on their streaming bundle in-home. But again, see where Netflix is. It's really, really interesting that as you go down through Disney+, through Apple, through the broadcaster services, it's Stan and Netflix at the bottom of the scale. So they are least likely to want to see advertising among that top 10. And that means that they're being positioned in the consumer mindset as premium-like platforms. So it is true that if you think about Netflix as an advertising platform, you are not going to reach everyone. You're going to reach this very specific subset of the audience, because a lot of people still perceive it, alongside Stan, as a very premium viewing experience, and they don't want to be interrupted by advertising. However, let's go back and look at the total potential market on Netflix and Disney. And we think by 2027, that will be about 10 million homes in Australia. That's the total, not the advertising addressable market. If we drill into our early forecasts, and remember, we're super early days, so it's very difficult to predict, but we think about 1.6 million Australian homes will be watching the ad tiers on Netflix and Disney, and that's about 8.5% of the customer base. So I'd call those relatively conservative forecasts, but that's about the size of the addressable ad market on those global streaming platforms. But there's another dynamic that is really important in the market, and that is maturity within the streaming landscape. Maturity simply means low growth. Growth is very hard to come by when you're at saturation in many of the biggest and richest markets in the world. And of course, we've got a few economic headwinds, which are also causing a change in approach to the market. One of those changes, of course, was the adoption of advertising. But another is a strategic change around moving from customer acquisition to customer retention. So keeping the customers you've already got has risen in importance, rather than trying to grab lots and lots of new ones by any means possible. This is important because it's important when we think about the advertising landscape and the content part of that equation. Because, of course, good content attracts viewers. And how do you get good content? You chuck a lot of money at it. Australia is the 7th largest market for content spend by the global streamers. That's on acquisition and production in the world. So a big market for content spend. It's English language. You have relatively high production values. So streamers are spending quite big in this country. Why does that matter for brands, for advertisers? Because, as I said, the content brings the viewers. And there is no streamer that is spending like the locals on an individual basis. But if you stack the global streamers together who are carrying advertising, then they're equal to the likes of 7 and 9 in terms of their annual content spend in this market. This, of course, is not global. This is local content spend. And that is important for how they're going to attract viewers. Another key factor, and this really kicked off during the pandemic, there was a shift in strategy away from scripted, so dramas, towards unscripted content for streaming spend. And that is the bread and butter of national broadcasters: reality TV, game shows, light entertainment, documentary, and formatable TV programs. And so we're seeing increasing overlap, not just in case of the demographic and the audience they're addressing, but in terms of the content they are competing for eyeballs with. Then, of course, we've got this new acronym, FAST. So as well as everything that's going on with Netflix and Disney and the big platforms, hundreds and hundreds of free ad-supported streaming TV channels have come online within the last 18 months, 2 years. Australia is at the beginning of that journey. 91 channels on Samsung TV. Compare that to nearly 300 that you get on the platforms in the US. Nonetheless, carrying advertising. But while FAST is television, it's not quite television as we know it. So if you drill into the anatomy of a FAST channel, and this is based on the channels on Pluto TV, 60% are based on a single show. The America's Got Talent channel, or whatever. Just 40% have a mix of programming. The most popular genres for FAST, documentary, and children. But look at that bottom statistic. Even those that have a mix of content only have 13 different programs a week. So they're looping and repeating a lot of content again and again and again. So can we ignore them? I don't think so, because the key point about FAST is that it's a linear television experience, or linear-like television experience. And it's really important to think of them in terms of how they bring the viewer mindset which has already shifted in the pay market to streaming, how they bring the linear viewer increasingly into the streaming landscape instead of the broadcast landscape. And that is essential for the future of the competitive environment. And just one more slide. What does that all mean? What does it all add up to at the end of the day? Well, this is TV advertising and then all forms of streaming advertising. And you can see that by 2027, it's 50-50, basically. So we're at that inflection point that we said at the beginning Australia was so stubborn to reach. And we think about, of that market, about a quarter will go to Netflix and Disney. The broadcasters will take the lion's share alongside Facebook and Google. But the key point, inflection, finally in this market. And with that, I'll say thank you very much. Please do use our QR code. This is a new innovation from Ampere. Before you had to send me an email. Now you can just scan that QR code, give your email, and we will send you the presentation. Thank you very much.
Stay there. Thank you, Guy. We have time for one quick question. Someone wants to be brave enough to ask a question with this room full? No? Too shy? You don't want to win some maple syrup? Unbelievable. I've got a quick question for you. Are you bullish or bearish about Netflix's ability to actually get enough scale with their ad-funded audiences?
I think they've said themselves 10% is what they're aiming for. 10% of revenue from advertising long term. So I think even their own ambitions are not massive. We're predicting about 8% of customers will take the ad tier by 2027. So I'd say we're fairly bearish on that. Yeah. Conservative on that, definitely.
I think that's one of their major struggles. So, yeah, that's great. It was an amazing presentation. We are sharing the slides with all delegates afterwards as well. So we will do it, email the delegates in the traditional way. Everyone, give Guy a massive round of applause for kicking off the event.
Thank you.